Good morning, everyone. It's really lovely to have you with us this morning. Welcome to our Teams event to launch the third round of the Carbon Innovation Fund. Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm one of the funding officers here at the Carbon Innovation Fund project team, and I've been working on the fund since its launch in November 2021. We're trying to get started as soon as we can, so I just want to give you some housekeeping items before we kick off properly as people are coming in. As you can see, we have everyone on mute with your video off. This is not because we don't want to see your lovely faces. We're just trying to minimize any problems with audio and visual for everybody. If it would be helpful, just a reminder that you can switch the captions on. Hopefully there should be a small box with a double C at the top of your right hand of your screen. If you click this box, it should turn on the captions for you. We really do want to engage with you on this session though, so you should be able to see a Q&A channel that should be on the right hand side of your screen. If you have any questions during the session, please pop them into the channel with your email address. We've set some time aside at the end of our session this morning to answer as many of your questions as we possibly can, but if we don't get to you, please don't worry. We will pop a frequently asked questions post on our website in the next few days, or if your question's quite specific to your project or quite technical, we'll email you with a response after the session. Please don't worry, we won't be posting or publishing the questions this morning, so your email address will only be seen by the team. And please note that due to the tech on this event, this is the only way we can answer your questions, so please do take advantage of it. We're expecting a lot of questions about whether your project is eligible. Hopefully that's why you're here. And we're going to talk through the eligibility criteria this morning. But a good sense check from us is to have a look at the application questions and see if you have a natural answer to each one of those. If you do, that's a really good indication that your project is eligible. We did post the guidance notes and application questions on our website last week, and we'll try and pop the link in the Q&A channel for you. We appreciate that this will be a lot of information and you might think of questions after the session. So please remember you can always email us at foundation@coop.co.uk and we'll come back to you as soon as possible. Finally, the session is being recorded this morning for anyone that's unable to make it or if you'd like to refer back to it. So please be aware of this. We're going to upload the recording to our website within the next couple of days, so keep an eye out for it. Could we move to the next slide, please? Okay, I can't see them moving.
Okay, it has been moved on.
All right, okay.
I'll go back.
Thanks, Soph.
Yeah, it's
Moved
showing
on.
the welcome slide.
Yeah, could we try and move to the agenda?
Yeah, it's on that on my screen.
Right, okay. Oh, I can't see it, but that's fine. We'll carry on. Hopefully, you'll be able to see. Basically, it's not really that important. It's just a quick overview of how the session will run. So we're going to talk you through the ins and outs of the fund, including things like assessment criteria, the eligibility, what our timelines will be, and what we expect around learning impact. We'll then have the time at the end for your questions. If there aren't that many questions, we will give you some time back and finish early. But just a reminder to use that Q&A chat as we go along. So before we get started properly, I'm going to pass over to Nick, our CEO at the Co-op Foundation, just so he can say a few words.
Thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. It's even better to be the Chief Exec at the Co-op Foundation, I have to say. We are proudly the Co-op's charity. It's 18 months now, there or thereabouts, since we launched our new strategy at the end of 2022. It's called Building Communities of the Future Together. And it's grounded in the recognition that cooperation is different from philanthropy. And for us, principally, that means giving away power. We asked a super diverse group of 100 young people what their vision of the future would be if it was fair and built on cooperative values. And the answers that they gave us were totally inspirational. These young visionaries want their communities of the future to be safe, to be prosperous, to be diverse, equitable and inclusive, to demonstrate youth leadership now, to be healthy, and also running through everything as a golden thread. They want their communities of the future to be sustainable. And that's why we are so proud of our Carbon Innovation Fund. It's a brilliant partnership that we have with the Co-op food business, of course, the biggest part of our corporate mothership. And the Co-op, of course, is not just another corporate. It was founded 179 years ago to change the world. And because it's owned by millions of individual members, it continues to change the world to this day, creating social value when Co-op members shop with us. And you should shop with us, by the way, if you don't already. We've got 2,400 food stores in every postcode area in the UK. So do join if you're not a member, not least because we get to do really cool things when members shop with us, like our Carbon Innovation Fund. I'm sure everybody will forgive the super cheeky plug. Now, CIF, of course, is in its third year and is a hugely significant part of our work to tackle the climate change in this decisive decade. And I've got to thank everybody across our CIF team, Ella and Sarah, and of course, the incomparable Aruna, whose leadership of this multi-year programme has just been extraordinary. And I've got to thank as well the wonderful Aditi Shah from Impatience Earth, who's provided us with just the most superb pro bono support across the whole years of this fund. So thank you for coming. Thank you for your interest in the foundation and in our Carbon Innovation Fund. And with that, I will hand over to the wonderful Aditi. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nick. And really lovely to see how the Co-op Foundation itself, the focus towards community-centered giving and young people's voices, and it's been really great to follow that journey as well alongside the work that we're doing on CIF. I just wanted to give a little bit of context, I guess, of how we got here, and we've been doing this work for about 3 years. And I guess when we first launched the Carbon Innovation Fund, we were very conscious of the fact that we were new to funding in this space, and we wanted to keep it really broad and open and make sure that we were very much learning from communities and farmers and growers and suppliers in the field about what their challenges are when it comes to climate and carbon and everything that kind of falls within that bucket. And I think for me personally, it's been really great to see how over the years and of the fund, how the team has engaged with previous kind of grantee partners and all the learning and impact work that's going on, and really building relationships within the sector, both with funders and with practitioners, the narrowing down of this fund. And last year we focused on kind of moving away from synthetic fertilizer, and this year we're focusing on alternatives to peat. And I guess the reason for this a little bit is we've heard from the sector and kind of research that we've helped conduct at Impatience Earth is there's a lot of support going into conserving peatlands, and that's some amazing work that the Co-op and the foundation are doing with RSPB. But we saw that there was a gap when it came to helping farmers transition away from using peat on their land, right? I think when we think about the wider context of agriculture and farmer livelihoods, whether that's smallholder farmers or whether that's large scale, we can't solely be focused on conservation if there's not an alternative for farmers to move towards, if we want to make sure that farming continues and that livelihoods of farmers is looked after and they have the resources and the kind of roadmaps, as it were, to shift away and therefore protect peatlands, but also continue farming and make sure that we have a secure supply chain and food on the table for years to come. So for us, it's been really great to see the CIF team think about those themes and really hone in and focus on quite niche issues and get deep within those issues. And so personally really excited to see the launch of this fund and see it address something that builds a much more kind of systemic response to the issues that we're seeing with peatlands and the carbon sinks that we're losing as a result of that. So yeah, really great to be here today and excited for the launch of the fund. And with that, I'll pass it over to Aruna, and she'll get into the nitty-gritties and details of how you can apply.
Thanks, Aditi. That was amazing. Thank you so much for that intro. Hi, everyone. My name's Aruna, and I'm a funding manager at Co-op Foundation. And I have the pleasure of most of my work being on this Carbon Innovation Fund. So I'm just here to give you a quick overview of the fund and how we actually got here to our peatland focused round 3, which Nick and Aditi have already alluded to. So yeah, as Nick said, we've been going for 3 years now with a different core focus each year, going back a couple of years in 2021. Like Aditi said, our pilot year was a broad range of amazing initiatives working to promote a more sustainable food and farming system. We kept it really broad, and we're really proud of our funded partners, which range from agroforestry in Sheffield to native oyster restoration in Cornwall. The following year, after review, we did decide that future rounds should take a more focused approach. And the reason for that is to allow for better synergy between our partners and so that we can have a more meaningful impact on a more specific theme. So as a result, the second round focused on projects reducing the UK's reliance on soy-containing feed and synthetic fertilisers. And again, we're so proud to say that we're supporting 7 really amazing partners. And you can find out more about those funds and those partners on our website. We could do a whole hour on those partners because there's so much to say. Also, to quickly note while we're here, the team at the foundation, we do say the term funded partners a lot. By funded partners, we mean organisations that have been awarded a grant from us. It's as simple as that. But we know there's a lot of jargon out there in this world, so we just want to make that really, really clear. So now you're here to hear about round 3. Round 3 has a peat focus, and you may be wondering why the focus on peat specifically. And obviously, you know, if you're here, that it's a huge problem that needs sorting. But more specifically, Co-op are particularly close to the issue. And I've always been proud to say that they were the first UK supermarket to ban peat-containing compost from shelves in 2021, focusing on peat-free alternatives only. But we are well aware that the work doesn't stop there. And in fact, actually, really, it's very, very much the start. So like I say, if you're attending this webinar, it's likely you're already aware, extremely aware of what peat is, how it works incredibly well as a carbon sink, how it protects wildlife, reduces flood risk, and regulates water flow. The benefits of peatland really are endless. When we were doing our research, the list just goes on and on. However, with almost 80% of UK peatland drying out and degrading, it is believed that without any intervention to repair and preserve UK peatlands, their greenhouse gas emissions could end up exceeding the equivalent of 20 million tonnes of carbon dioxide each year. So it's literally millennia of stored emissions coming out of the peatlands, which in turn raises global temperatures, as you will know. One reason for the degradation, peatland is often drained for farming practices and or broken up to put the peat into compost as a growth aid within food growing. We recognise this is a major issue, and it's a major issue for all food growers and retailers. And as a result, we want to focus our funding on ways to protect peatland while at the same time still providing the food that we need to eat. So to support this cause, our new programme will look to fund a range of different initiatives across the UK, which can do one or more of the following, which you can see on the slide here, hopefully. So we're either looking at initiatives that reduce the amount of peat needed to grow crops. We're looking at initiatives that may totally remove the peat needed to grow crops, or alternatively, we're looking at sustainable management or looking after peat soils by using alternative, non-damaging farming methods for crops and or livestock grazing. So hopefully that gives you a good intro into sorts of things we're looking at, but we're going to get more and more detailed as we go on, and I'll pass on to Ella for some more information on grants.
Thank you. Can we move to the next slide, please, there? So hi everyone, I'm Ella. I am a funding manager here at the Co-op Foundation, and I'm just going to run through a bit more detail of the specifics of the grants and what you can apply for. So applicants can apply for between £50,000 and £100,000 for your project. We do encourage applications on a full cost recovery basis. So by that we mean including all the associated core and overhead costs within your project budget. We really don't want your organisations to find yourself out of pocket delivering work for us. We want to fund everything that you need to do. We ask that projects will start within 6 months of the grant being awarded. But after that, we don't mind the time period that you spend it over. So if it feels appropriate to deliver your piece of work in 10 months or a year or 18 months or 2 years, that's absolutely fine. We just want to know the best time frame for the work that you want to do. We expect that we'll fund between 6 and 10 organisations across the UK. So the exact number will depend on the amount that the successful applicants ask for. We have additionally partnered with Heart of Books Community Foundation for a bit of match funding, and we ring fence a little bit of funding for one project in Buckinghamshire. If you're in Buckinghamshire and want to know more about that, we're actually running a separate webinar this afternoon. So drop your email address in the Q&A and we can point you in the direction of that because there's some specific guidance there. But otherwise, just to flag that we assess applications against others from the same nation. So for example, Scottish applications will go into a shortlist with the other Scottish ones and so on. And just to note as well that the English shortlist is often the most competitive just because there are more people who live in England. So it tends to be a higher number of applications. Okay, next slide, please there. So who can apply? So any type of organisation of any size based in the UK is welcome to apply for the Carbon Innovation Fund. But just to note, to be funded, you must meet these criteria. So there must be evidence that the work does not lead to private gain of wealth. That's because of our rules around our charitable funding. You must be able to commit to open source sharing of the information, so no protection of intellectual property rights in the work that we fund. Your organisation must be legally constituted with a bank account in your organisation's legal name. You must be able to evidence a pilot of the work that you want to do for your funded project. So you do not need to have carried out the pilot yourselves, but there does need to have been some sort of pilot or proof of concept for the work that you want to do. And the work needs to be taking place in the UK. We do prefer that funded organisations have at least 2 unconnected people on your board. By unconnected, we mean people that are not married or related. And by board, we mean your directors, your legal directors or trustees as listed with Charities Commission or Companies House, whoever your governing body is. We know sometimes, though, that perhaps family businesses or family farms will not meet this criteria, and that is okay. We just would recommend that if that is your organisation, that you do get in touch with us before applying so that we can just have a quick chat about that. Just to note as well that if any co-op suppliers or producers are doing eligible work, we are happy to receive applications from suppliers, but just to note that suppliers will not be automatically prioritised over any other applicant. And we do welcome applications from organisations working in partnership, so projects who are joining up with statutory organisations or public, private, whoever. But if you are working in a partnership, just to note that one single organisation does need to act as the lead applicant and be the legal recipient of the grant. Okay, so I'm going to pass back to Aruna to go through a few extra bits there, and if we can move to the next slide, please.
Thanks, Ella. So just doing the opposite of what Ella was talking about, basically. So looking at what we can't fund before we get into the criteria and how we score. It's best to mention what we can't fund. If that means that you can't apply and need to leave the call, absolutely no offence taken at all. So looking at what we can't fund, the first one being using our funding to purchase or use ready-made peat-free compost off the shelf or ordered online to use on your crops. I appreciate that this idea in principle may fit the criteria, but for us it's a little bit too simplistic and doesn't demonstrate any innovation or new alternatives to ensure peatland is not damaged within our food system. So hopefully you understand. We cannot support projects which do not support food and farming of food. So in other words, we can't support projects focusing only on bedding, ornamental or pot plants. If that makes up part of your project, it would still be eligible. But yeah, we don't want you to be focusing solely on ornamental plants, etc. Projects focusing on peatland restoration only with no element of farming or food farming involved. So again, if restoration made up part of your project, of course it would be acceptable. I also want to say that we obviously do recognise the importance of restoration work, and that's why Co-op have partnered with RSPB on a large-scale multi-million peatland restoration project. However, the Co-op Foundation wants to sit separately, and we want to fund some innovative trials and new work to support our food and farming system. Unfortunately, we cannot support policy and lobbying initiatives, and we cannot support brand new ideas before any initial pilot or proof of concept has taken place. So even if it's a tiny little pilot or a quick proof of concept, that's fine. We just cannot fund that initial ideation stage. We cannot fund projects that can't commit to open source sharing. So in other words, we can only fund projects that are open source. So this includes any work on patenting or intellectual property, which leads to private gain. And that's obviously because we are a charity, so we need to fund work that is open source and charitable in its own right. We cannot fund retrospective projects and costs. So in other words, if your project is already complete, you can't apply for funding to cover those costs, unfortunately. And again, just saying the opposite to what Ella was saying, we cannot fund projects taking place outside of the UK. It sits outside of the Co-op Foundation's charitable objectives. So that's hopefully all of the doom and gloom for now. And I can't see that many people or anyone actually has dropped off. So that's good news. And I'll pass back to Ella to talk about our application criteria.
Thanks, Aruna. And if we can move to the next slide, please. I'll just go through the application criteria that we will use to assess applications. And just to remind you as well, you can start popping questions into the Q&A channel and we can start picking those up and we'll come to them at the end. So feel free to drop in any questions at any time. Okay, so application criteria. So as hopefully you know, we can accept applications from today. The application form will go live after this webinar and they will close on the 15th of March. So there's a month there to put an application together. So we will split our funding criteria up into essential and desirable. And you'll notice that the questions on the application form kind of map over directly onto each of these criteria. So just to say that the essential criteria and questions are weighted more heavily in the scoring process. They are the most important. And you must be able to comfortably answer those questions. So I would say have a read through, see if you feel like you've got a natural answer to those questions rather than trying to kind of shoehorn something in, because they're the ones that are less likely to kind of score well. We do also hope that you will be able to answer some of the desirable questions, but we appreciate that not everybody will be able to address each of them. And again, wouldn't want you to shoehorn things in, but we do expect the successful applicants to be able to respond to at least some of the desirable criteria as well. So first essential criteria is an awareness of how your work reduces and emits greenhouse gases, so your net greenhouse gas emissions, which we know can be a little bit complicated to express perhaps, but we know that by preserving peatland you will be reducing greenhouse gas emissions and protecting a really important natural landscape. But realistically, the work you deliver is also likely to be emitting some greenhouse gases as well through kind of transport, imports, usage of raw materials or energy use. So we'd just like to see an understanding of the net greenhouse gas emissions. If you only have some of that information available, just provide what you can. And any details around mitigation for the emissions of greenhouse gases would be really helpful to hear about as well there. The next essential criteria is kind of building on that, showing an awareness of any negative or unintended knock-on effects. So we're really conscious that often when we're trying to solve one problem, we might inadvertently create another. So aside from greenhouse gas emissions, which we'll hear about in the previous question, we'd just like to get an idea of any adverse social or environmental consequences that you anticipate your work may have. We know that most projects will have some knock-on consequences, and we just ask you to be open and honest about that and demonstrate any potential mitigation techniques that you've thought about. So again, applicants that can demonstrate a mitigation plan are likely to score more highly. The next essential criteria is around cooperation. So as a Co-op Foundation, we like cooperation. So we don't want to see how you can demonstrate that you're cooperating with others. This can be at any or every stage of your project. So we're really interested in the inclusion of the kind of target audience of the work. So perhaps involving farmers in the production of a peat alternative for farms, but it could also look like engaging a university or an academic centre to gather data. Just to note that if you are working in partnership with others, as the lead applicant, you might want to carry out due diligence checks on any partners you want to work with. That's your responsibility to do, but do get in touch if you want any support around that. And the last essential criteria is around sharing learning. So as we've said, it is essential that your learnings are open source and there's no intellectual property rights or private gain. And we're looking for projects with a robust and extensive dissemination plan to share the work widely. So in the answer to that question, we'd like to get an idea of your plans to share learning throughout the project and at the end of the project. So those are the essential criteria. Just to run through the desirable ones quickly. We're really interested in any extra environmental benefits beyond just the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and also to hear about how you might measure this. So for example, perhaps increased biodiversity on your site measured through a biodiversity metric calculator. That could be it could be any other thing though, it could be really broad. So interested to hear your views on what your other environmental benefits are going to be through the project you want to do. We're also interested in human benefits, so projects that benefit people. This could relate to the general community or a specific group of people, so perhaps volunteering opportunities or reduced cost of inputs for farmers. There's lots of things that could look like. And the final desirable criteria is about scalability. So it's not essential, but we're really interested to understand how your work could be scaled up to increase impact and benefits, perhaps within food supply chains, perhaps somewhere else. And we're really interested especially to understand how initiatives could take affordability into account when scaling up, because we know that this can be a real barrier. Okay, so last couple of points on applications. Just to flag that if your organisation makes a shortlist but is ultimately unsuccessful, we hope to be able to share your application with other funders who might be able to support, and we would ask your permission to do this, but we've got a good network of other environmental funders we might be able to share your project with. And a final point on applications, we will send you a copy to your email address when you've completed it. When you're filling in the application form, just really check there are no typos in your email address, because that's the only way that we'll have to contact you. And if it's wrong, if it's not written correctly, we won't be able to get back in touch with you about progress. So please double check that when you're doing the form. Okay, so if we want to move on to the next slide, and I'll pass back to Aruna to talk a little bit about opportunities within the co-op supply chain.
Thanks, Ella. So yes, this is just a little bit on opportunities with our co-op suppliers. So although we're a separate entity to co-op and co-op food, we do realise that it's a total privilege to be connected to a food retailer, and we want to ensure that opportunities are really leveraged when it comes to forging relationships with our funded partners. So organisations, applicants, you on this webinar will be asked if you would consider the option of collaborating with a current co-op supplier in your initial application stage. But rest assured that no preference would be given to those who are interested versus those who aren't. It's totally up to you. Those that do consider this option and are successful with a Carbon Innovation Fund grant will have their details sent to the co-op food supplier network. And we feel like this could be mutually beneficial, because we think that potentially co-op suppliers or growers or producers may have technical or practical insights for you, while the funded partners, you may bring sort of fresh ideas or knowledge or alternatives to support common challenges related to peat within the supply chain. And we think that this could create some really exciting collaborative opportunities, whether it's related to your grant or not. So the foundation simply acts as like a broker service, is how we explain it, between successful partners and suppliers, with the hope of future collaboration and sharing. But please note, it's ultimately you, the applicant's choice, whether to proceed with a partnership opportunity or not. There's absolutely no expectation and no pressure at all. And just to note that the Co-op Foundation cannot award additional funding for working with suppliers, nor can we guarantee that successful applicants would each obtain a collaborative opportunity within the supply chain. It's purely simply just an additional add-on bonus that we want to offer anyone that's interested. And I'll pass on to Asamina now, who will talk a little bit about learning and evaluation. Oh, Asamina, you're on mute. Sorry.
I'm so sorry. Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. I'm the head of Learning and Impact at the Co-op Foundation, and I would love to share with you our overarching learning and impact approach at the foundation and how it applies for the Carbon Innovation Fund Round 3. So first of all, at the foundation, we want to turn learning into actions for greater impact. Our learning and measuring impact are underpinned by our cooperative values, which I'm going to explain in more detail how they apply in the Carbon Innovation Fund Round 2. And how we learn is as important as what we learn. We want to understand where we're making a difference, what works in what context, And we are a reflective funder that believes in continuous improvement as an organization. So we're equally interested in our approach to funding and how does it work or doesn't work for our funded partners. We support our grantees in learning and measuring impact for their own benefit, to improve their practice and also foster opportunities for peer learning. So our expectations of partners are proportionate and set in the context of transparent and open and trusting relationships. We also embed diversity, equity, and inclusion principles in our learning, and we do our best to commission diverse teams to measure impact and employ culturally appropriate methodologies. So, focusing on the Carbon Innovation Fund Round 3, with our learning, we would like to contribute to more sustainable ways to create a thriving food and farming sector without damaging important peat soils in the UK. Our overall approach will include commissioning a consultancy to work and support partners on learning and evaluation at project, but also at programmatic level. Our evaluation will be focusing both on the impact of our funding at project level, overall program level, but also on our processes as a funder. We want to learn from our funded partners whether our approach to funding has worked or things we can improve in the future. So we have lots of opportunities, including in the Carbon Innovation Fund Round 3. First of all, we acknowledge that there needs to be funding in learning and impact. And for that reason, we encourage our applicants to include 5% of your project budget allocated to learning and evaluation activities. We expect that the project evaluation will look at what works, how and why, the strengths and challenges in your projects. And we would like your evidence to be used to support you improve your practice during the project, but also to scale up after your project finishes and for future fundraising activities. This is really crucial for us. We aspire and we hope that we will involve some of our funded partners in commissioning the consultant that will be overall responsible for the learning and evaluation, so that they will meet our funded partners' needs. And we expect the consultant to work with the funded partners to support with refining project outcomes, with designing the evaluation tools, structuring the final project evaluation report. Last but also importantly, our consultancy will also work with our funded partners to create peer learning opportunities. As outputs overall of the learning and impact journey, I would say, we expect to have a learning report on an emerging theme of interest to our funded partners that will not come at the end of the project's completion. This will come midway, so that all the partners together will create something around emerging learning that will be useful in the sector. We hope to support our funded partners to create their own project evaluation reports to use for future fundraising activities as well. And last, we would like to have a final program evaluation report that will summarize impact across our projects, but also we will learn from it how we did as a funder. I'm going to finish this very short kind of input with one of my favorite quotes. The true value of a project lies not just in its delivery, but in its reflection through evaluation, where lessons learned become the seeds of future success. So we would love to ensure that with our learning and impact approach, we support you, our funding partners, for your future success too. Thank you. And over to you, Ella.
Thank you so much, Asamina. If we can move on to the next slide, please. And you'll be pleased to hear that we've nearly finished talking now, and there'll be time, quite a good amount of time, hopefully, to address your questions. So I just wanted to briefly look through the timelines, just so you're all aware. So as I said earlier, the applications open today and they close on the 15th of March. We'll then get into our assessments, and we will let you know in the week commencing the 15th of April if you have been moved on to the next stage or if you've not been successful at the first round. So hopefully that's quite quick. And so then if you have been successful to move on to the next round, we'll give you a couple of weeks and ask you for a bit more information. So things like full project budgets, a little bit more detail on the work that you want to do. We then expect to be having assessment calls we call them, with the shortlisted applicants during the week commencing the 13th of May. So that's a call of around 30 or 40 minutes where we just get to know you a little bit better and understand any details that we want to of the project that you're proposing. Our funding panel will take place in the week commencing the 24th of June, and we will let you know the outcome of that funding panel in the week commencing the 27th of June. So by the end of that week, so at the beginning of July, you should know the outcome of your applications. So from July onwards, we'll be setting up the grants, getting the money over to you, and projects can start from July. So if you're thinking about timelines, you can start as early as July or as late as January. So as we said, you would need to have started your project by January at the latest. Okay, and then the public announcement of awarded funds will be happening from September, and we'll start making referrals into our co-op supply chain from then. So that's the timelines, just so that you're aware of what we're dealing with. We're going to go to questions now, and between myself and Arena, we'll do our best to answer your questions. Just a reminder, if your question, especially if your question's quite specific about your project, if you want to pop your email address in with your question, no one else will see it apart from us, and it just means that if we can't address it now in the call, we'll follow up with you. And we will publish an FAQs document on our website in the next few days as well, so you can refer back to that for any frequently asked questions. So get popping your questions in and we will get to as many as we can. Okay, so first question that's come in there, I think Aruna, you were going to take. Do you want to get that?
Yeah. So the first question is, why are we focusing on food and not looking wider into horticulture, bedding plants and pot plants? Yeah, absolutely. We were expecting that question, and we definitely recognise and understand that the issue within peat is definitely not isolated within food growing supply chains. So please don't think that it's a lack of understanding on our part. However, the Carbon Innovation Fund has been and is all about creating sustainable food systems. Our funding comes from the co-op food business, and all of the in-house expertise is within food, and that's something that we want and sort of need to capitalise on. Also, we found from last year that having a more focused approach allows for better synergies and learning between partners, and we really hope to create that for this year too. Ella, did you want to take the next one?
Yeah, okay. So there's a question here about being able to apply if you're a PLC or a private company. And the answer is yes, that we can fund any kind of organisation, as we said. And just to reiterate that you need to be committed to open source sharing. There's a bit more of a detailed question about that we'll come back to in a bit. But generally, we ask for open source sharing and the project is not leading to private gain of wealth. It needs to be for the public good. So you can come and speak to us if you're unclear about that. You can get in touch and we can talk through the details. Just a side note, if you're applying in Buckinghamshire through the Partnership Fund, you need to be a not-for-profit organisation, but that won't be applicable to most, if not all, people here. I just wanted to flag that. Irene, did you want to take the next question?
Yeah, so the next one, can an organisation submit more than one application? Yes, they absolutely can, but just please note that it's unlikely that both or all of your applications from the same organisation would be funded because we like to spread out the opportunities for funding. But you're very welcome to sort of try your chances, and it might be that more than one gets funded. It just depends on who else applies.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
so we had a question here about co-op suppliers. So asking if co-op suppliers are given preference over everybody else, and just to say, no, that's not the case. They'll go through exactly the same competitive process. There's no preference. We're happy to hear from co-op suppliers, but there's no advantage there particularly. Okay, Irene, do you want to take the next one?
Yeah. Can partners that have already had funding from round 1 apply for round 2, or basically can previous funded partners for the Carbon Innovation Fund apply? Yes, they are very welcome to apply. You wouldn't be given any preference over any other applicants, but we are more than happy to consider any application that is eligible. It does not matter what organisation you're from or if we already have funded you.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so we've got a question here about kind of stacking funding with any other additional funds, and the example given in the question was the Polyculture Exploration Fund. Absolutely fine. And there was another kind of follow-up question to that about contributing to a larger project. So absolutely happy to be a match funder, no specific percentage. So if you have a project that's for £200,000 and you want our money to be 150 of that, that's fine. If you have £1 million project and you want our funding to be £150,000 of that, also fine. We ask a question in the form just to get clarity on that. We ask if your project is part of a bigger piece of work, and just to understand what the status of the contributions are. So, for example, if it's a much bigger project and you haven't got all of your other match funding lined up, we'd have to just consider the ability then for you to actually start your project within the 6-month time frame if you didn't have the rest of the funding lined up. But in principle, absolutely fine to be a match funder at any percentage. Okay, do you want to take the next one, Arena?
Yes, a bit more of a specific one, the next one. So relating to IP, it is possible that a new formulation of peat-free growing media would be developed. Does this actual formulation, i.e. percentage inclusion rates of raw materials and fertilizers, need to be disclosed? Growing media manufacturers are unlikely to share this information as it is commercially sensitive. So this is quite specific to the project. My gut feeling, although it's probably best that we follow up one-on-one on this one, my gut feeling on this is that this would be fine. What we would want to see is an understanding of what you are putting in this peat-free growing media. If percentage inclusion rates puts your organisation at risk, then of course we would not advise you to do that. We have funded some projects before that have very small areas of the project that need to be kept confidential so that the organisation is actually viable. And we have funded that and allowed that to happen. So really, when we talk about the intellectual property rights and the confidentiality, what we don't want is your entire project to be kept under wraps. Because that's not what we're looking for. But if there are small little parts, we can absolutely discuss that with you, especially if there's good reason, like you've just described there.
Thanks, Aruna. So the next question here is around policy blockers. So the question is, if policy blockers are identified, for example, the use of certain raw materials are not permitted under current legislation, can an organisation lobby on their behalf, but not linked to the co-op funding? So my feeling on that is yes. We actually have funded organisations through other rounds of the Carbon Innovation Fund that are in a similar situation where the work they want, the kind of products they want to use are not currently permitted under current legislation. And so what we would say there is we want to hear about your plans to kind of make progress on that. And I would say as long as our funding isn't directly used for lobbying, then that should be okay. So if you want to have a follow-up kind of clarification conversation about that with us, definitely get in touch, but I would say in principle that should be okay. There's another quick question here. How many funding rounds are there? Will there be a fund in 2025 that has similar criteria? The answer to that is unfortunately no. So this is the third round of 3 that's of the Carbon Innovation Fund. We hope to have further funds available for kind of climate activities in the future, but we don't know exactly what that will look like yet, and it's not guaranteed. So this was a 3-year partnership with the co-op. They've given us some funding to do the Carbon Innovation Fund, so we are in the final round of funding this year. If we can, find other money from other people to do more of this, then great. But for now, this is the third and final round of the Carbon Innovation Fund in its current form. Okay.
Thanks, Ella. We've got one around, is the amount allocated to learning and education or learning and evaluation limited at 5%? So basically 5% is our recommendation based on what we might ask of you and working with our learning partner. But if applicants feel that they need more funding to be allocated to those activities, then we would advise a maximum allocation of maybe 10%, which is aligned with sort of good practice of other funding programmes. But if you have any reason to think that you would need significantly more, please just get in touch with us and we can discuss that with you. And also just to reiterate that the amount allocated to learning and evaluation needs to be within the budget, within the grant that we give you. So please factor that in when you budget. We've got another question around describing a bit more about the trial or proof of concept needed. So this is going to depend on your project. So again, maybe best to pick up one-on-one on that one. But really all we want is an idea that this thing, whatever it is that you're doing, has happened before, or you've at least tried for it to happen. So it's quite tricky to answer that question without understanding more about your project. But the proof of concept is, even if it wasn't successful, and then your application can talk about how you're going to build on it or improve it, or show that you've taken some learnings from that, that's absolutely fine. So the trial doesn't even need to be a successful trial necessarily, but there needs to be some evidence of a positive result of whatever that trial or proof of concept is. Hopefully that's clear enough, but please do get in touch with us and we can talk to you more about that in relation to your specific project.
Thanks, Aruna. Okay, so questions are coming in thick and fast now, so thank you so much. So next question is around there being a maximum amount of partners that can work together on a project. No, there isn't. I would say just have a think about the management of that, perhaps, as a flag. So in our last round of funding, we did fund an organisation, I think it was an 11-way partnership, something like that. There were lots and lots of organisations that were involved to a greater or lesser degree. So we'd love to see that cooperation. But again, we just would encourage you to think practically about how you would manage that, how it's going to be kind of funded across, everybody's contribution. But in theory, no, absolutely fine. Just work with as many people as you want. The question here about spreading projects across the country. So, and are we trying to get a kind of reasonably equal geographical spread of projects? Would we approach organisations if we don't get a kind of full distribution? So we do want to fund organisations in every nation of the United Kingdom, and we do make an effort to do that. I would say that if we, for example, we didn't just within, England, for example, we just didn't have any that matched up to the criteria and the kind of minimum quality, we wouldn't fund those organisations just because they were there. We would want to see a minimum quality. And if we, as you say, if we had not got any applications from any particular region or nation, we might do a little bit of targeted advertising of the fund. But you have been lucky in the past that we've had a reasonably equal split. I say equal. As a foundation, we try to fund proportionately, so it's not sort of 5 in England, 5 in Scotland, 5 in Wales. It tends to be more pro rata by population. But we do want to have representation from each of the UK nations. And we will follow up with a little bit of targeted promotion of the fund, if we don't get a fully even split. But ultimately, we'll be driven by the quality of the applications that we get. Okay, did you want to take that next question, Aruna?
Yeah, we've got one, someone saying that they operate as a sole trader in upland restoration, looking into peat-free compost production. Should I set up a CIC or other non-profit with a board, or can you apply as a small family business or sole trader? Yes, so if you were looking into setting up a CIC or other non-profit anyway, I would highly recommend that you go down that route. You'll probably have a much easier time being funded by ourselves and any other foundation or funder if you have an organisation set up. However, if for some reason that makes you nervous, for whatever reason, or you've encountered some difficulties doing that, we are not ruling out giving grants to family businesses this time, but what I would recommend is that you get in touch. So we will need to have a few more conversations with you, and we might have to do a little bit more due diligence, etc. But we totally understand that for some people it's just not possible for them to be setting up as a non-profit for this fund.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there's quite a specific question here around wanting a contact with an academic partner for a project operating in Scotland around peat-free composting and soil fertility. So I agree that it probably would be a great idea to work with an academic partner. We can make a couple of recommendations if you want to just drop in your email address into the chat there, but we can mention perhaps a couple of people that we're aware of, but I think that's something that you will probably know more about than we do. If you're based in Scotland, we are not. So it's like I say, if you pop your contact details in there, we can maybe suggest 1 or 2 people, but it would be something that ultimately would be your decision, and you will have much more local knowledge about the best opportunity for that. Okay, what's next?
Do you want me to take the? Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, go on, Aruna.
Just it's a simple one. Can we use grants to fund internships? Yes, we can. You can. So we can fund core costs or capital costs as long as it's part of your project and something that you need to run your project. That's absolutely fine.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So quick question here about how many applicants will make the shortlist. So we did just mention that in the information that we gave, but we expect sort of between 6 and 10, depending on the size of grant that people come through. So we have a kind of fixed budget for the third round of funding. And if everyone applies for £50,000, obviously we'll be able to fund more. And if everyone applies for 150, it will be a bit less. So we'll just see what we get there. But yeah, it tends to be somewhere between 6 and 10. And then once we've got our funded partners in place, then we'll have a little cohort. So hopefully a quite manageable number that you can get to know the other organisations that we've funded and share learning between yourselves.
I've just had one through saying, well, I've just seen a different one.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Does the proof of concept need to reference projects we have directly been involved in, or can it be academic research or projects happening in other countries? Really good question that we didn't address, actually. Yes, it can be somebody else having done that pilot. It doesn't have to be yourself, as long as it's the kind of work that you're doing. That is absolutely fine. You can just reference it within your application.
Yeah. Solely peat-free compost production meet the guidelines, or would it need to link directly with food production? I think we'd need to see evidence of how that compost could support food production. So it's fine that it could also support, other kinds of growing, but there does need to be a link to food and farming, because that is the focus of the Carbon Innovation Fund.
Yeah, I think as long as you can evidence that your end market would include food growing, then that would be fine.
Any more questions from the audience? We will follow up with an FAQs just to kind of have these written down, as we don't expect everyone to have written down or remembered exactly what we've said.
Just one more to address here. If a project grows both bedding plants and food crops, can we still apply? The answer is yes. I'd say yes, if the project covers both aspects, you can definitely apply and you would be eligible. But what we just want to see is a genuine focus on food rather than shoehorning in the food aspect. In any case, we just want to see that focus on food for sure.
Yeah. And just a quick question here about the kind of monitoring that organisations should expect during the lifetime of the grant. So we tend to treat that on quite a case-by-case basis. So it depends on the size of the organisation and the kind of support you think you might need. At the very least, we would expect to have a kind of informal phone check-in every 6 months between you and your grant manager. So the person in the foundation that's kind of allocated to be your point of contact, just to discuss progress and kind of learnings and any changes you might want to make. And then, as Asamina mentioned, there will also be a learning and impact partner to really formally support with the evaluation of the work. And we expect that we'll have meetings, sometimes online, sometimes in person with that. So we can't give you a specific answer to that question now, because it will depend on the work that you want to do. But we do always try and have a really supportive relationship with the organisations that we fund. And we don't want to overload people with too much monitoring. So we really try and make that proportionate as possible. Okay, can't see any more questions coming in.
Yeah, I think we've answered quite a few with each answer, and we can group them together. We'll pop in. Sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think we've got a couple that are probably a little bit wider than we've got time for explaining now. So if we've not answered your question in the webinar, please do check out the frequently asked questions. That will give us more space to be able to answer. And if you've left us your email address, we'll contact you directly.
Yeah, you also have the email address foundation@coopcoop.co.uk if you want to get in touch with us and ask any more questions.
Yeah, more than happy to follow up about any specifics that you want to talk to us about before you put an application in. But we really hope to hear from lots of you. And yeah, see what work you've got to bring to the fund.
Yeah, absolutely. Should we close it there? Thank you, everyone, for your time. Thanks for listening to us for 55 minutes. I know that was a lot of information. All of the guidance notes and application questions can be found on our website. And we're here for the applications are open for a month, and we're here to answer any questions. You know where we are. Yeah,
this is being recorded, so if you want to see us again, you're welcome to, or as we say, do get in touch for any follow-up questions.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.